I didn't expect my marriage anniversary to turn into a workplace trial, but somehow that's exactly what happened. 3 weeks before my anniversary vacation, I found myself sitting at my desk pretending to focus on my screen while the entire office quietly judged me. The whispers weren't subtle. The looks weren't accidental. People who used to joke with me by the coffee machine suddenly avoided eye contact, or worse, looked at me like I'd done something cruel, all because I refused to give up my approved vacation. I'm 34 years old. I work at a mid-sized marketing firm where time off is treated like a scarce resource. You don't just take vacation here, you plan it months in advance, submit requests early, and hope you're lucky enough to get approved before all the good slots disappear. My husband Daniel and I had done everything right. We'd been married for 8 years. 8 years of grinding, saving, postponing dreams, because there was always something more urgent: work deadlines, family obligations, bills that needed paying. Last fall, we finally decided this anniversary would be different. We booked an adventure trip we'd been dreaming about for years. We planned ahead. I submitted my vacation request 8 months in advance. It was approved immediately. And then came Natasha. She was a coworker, single mom, always talking about her kids, always struggling, always reminding everyone how hard her life was. At first, it was just comments, little remarks about how unfair it was that parents couldn't get priority for time off, how heartbreaking it would be if her children missed out on a Disney trip. Then she asked me outright to give her my vacation slot. I said no. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it became the beginning of weeks of guilt, pressure, manipulation, and lies. Lies so elaborate that they eventually blew up her entire career. By the time the truth came out, I wasn't just the woman who refused to help a coworker. I was the woman who had been right all along. And that realization came with consequences I never imagined. My name is Alyssa Reed, and I'm 34. I've been with Brightwell Marketing Group for 5 years, long enough to understand the unspoken rules that matter more than the employee handbook. The official policy says vacation requests must be submitted at least 3 months in advance. The unofficial truth is harsher. If you want time off during summer or holidays, you submit early, or you don't go anywhere at all. It's a company of about 40 employees, and our department runs lean. When even one person is out, everyone feels it. That's why vacations become political. That's why approval feels like a prize. And that's why, when my manager approved my June request right away, I didn't celebrate loudly. I just exhaled, quiet, relieved, almost afraid that if I acted too happy, the universe would notice and snatch it away. Because that trip wasn't just a trip. It was the first time my husband and I were choosing us without apologizing for it. My husband, Daniel Reed, is 32. He's calm where I'm intense, patient where I spiral. We got married young, right after college. 2 kids who thought love could outrun reality if we held hands tightly enough. Reality, of course, didn't care. For most of our 20s, we worked, we saved, we delayed. Every time we talked about doing something big for an anniversary, something interrupted, an unexpected expense, a work deadline, a family obligation that came with guilt attached. Last October, Daniel sat with me on the couch, our laptops open, and said, "If we don't do it now, we'll keep finding reasons not to." That sentence landed in me like a weight and a promise at the same time. So we planned something we'd never done, an adventure resort in Costa Rica. Hiking, zip-lining, rainforest trails, the kind of trip that feels like you're waking up inside your own life again. We booked it in November, 8 months ahead, and I submitted my request immediately. Daniel grinned when I hit send like he'd just watched me reclaim something. When my manager approved it the same day, Daniel lifted his mug like a toast. "To 8 years," he said. "To finally doing something for us," I answered. For months, the trip became this quiet anchor in my mind. When work got messy, I thought of warm air and green canopy. When life felt heavy, I pictured Daniel reaching for my hand on a trail, both of us laughing like we used to before adulthood made everything sharp. Then, Natasha started talking. Natasha Palmer, 29, worked in my department. She was the kind of coworker everyone knew, even if they didn't know her deeply, because she narrated her life out loud. She had 2 kids, Nancy, 7, and Brett, 9. She talked about them constantly. School events, tantrums, finances, how hard it was doing everything alone since her divorce 2 years ago. At first, I sympathized. I really did. I'd listen and nod, offer polite encouragement when she looked tired. Our relationship was professional, friendly enough, but not intimate. We weren't friends who texted on weekends. We were coworkers who shared a floor and occasionally shared small talk. About 6 weeks before my vacation, Natasha began circling one specific dream: Disney World. She mentioned it like it was oxygen, like it was the one bright thing she could offer her kids to prove she hadn't failed them. I didn't realize then that her dream was about to collide with mine, and that she wouldn't treat it like a collision. She'd treat it like a conquest. At first, Natasha's comments felt harmless. They floated through the office like background noise, easy to ignore if you weren't listening closely. She'd sigh dramatically near the coffee machine and say things like, "I just don't know how I'm supposed to give my kids a real childhood when everything is so expensive." Or, "Disney isn't even about me. It's about memories. They're only little once." I'd nod politely, maybe offer a sympathetic, "That's tough," nothing more. But over time, the comments shifted. They sharpened. She started framing things differently, less about her situation, more about other people's privilege. "Must be nice to travel whenever you want," she said one morning, glancing pointedly at my desk. "People without kids don't have to plan around school schedules," she added another day, her tone light, but her eyes calculating. I remember feeling a faint prickle of discomfort then. Not anger, yet, just awareness. Something in her voice suggested comparison, measurement. Still, I told myself I was reading too much into it. 3 weeks before my vacation, she stopped circling the issue and walked straight into it. She leaned against the side of my cubicle one afternoon, arms folded, voice soft in a way that felt practiced. "Can I ask you something kind of big?" she said. I turned in my chair, already uneasy. She explained that she'd waited too long to submit her vacation request, that all the summer slots were taken. That June was perfect because school would just be out and Disney would be less crowded than July. Then she looked at me and said, "I heard you're off the second week of June." I didn't answer right away. "I was wondering," she continued, "if you'd consider moving your vacation to a different time so I could take that slot." The room felt suddenly too quiet. I took a breath and told her the truth, calmly, clearly. I said Daniel and I had planned this trip for months, that we'd booked everything last fall, that we'd already paid for the resort and flights, that changing dates would cost us hundreds of dollars and probably mean losing the experience entirely. "I'm really sorry," I said, "but I can't change my plans." Her face tightened. She didn't explode. She didn't argue yet. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, "I just thought you might understand. This is really important to my kids." I repeated myself, politely, firmly. That should have been the end of the conversation. Instead, it became the beginning of a campaign. Over the next few days, Natasha started talking louder, broader. She told the same story to anyone who would listen. How devastated her kids would be if the trip didn't happen. How she'd already looked at hotels. How everything lined up perfectly, except for one thing. She never said my name. She didn't have to. At lunch, I'd hear, "Some people just don't realize how lucky they are." In meetings, she'd mutter, "I guess some vacations matter more than others." Coworkers started approaching me, casually, carefully. Mark from the next row suggested I try to be more flexible. Linda from accounts said kids deserved magical experiences more than adults deserved adventure trips. Each conversation felt like a small push, a reminder that my happiness was being weighed against someone else's desperation and found wanting. I started dreading work, not because of deadlines, because I was being quietly cast as the villain in a story I never volunteered to be part of. And Natasha wasn't done yet. She was just warming up. The moment everything crossed, from uncomfortable into unbearable, happened on a Friday afternoon. I was in the break room, rinsing out my mug, when Natasha walked in and closed the door behind her. Not slammed, not aggressively, carefully. The kind of deliberate movement that makes your shoulders tense before your mind catches up. "Can we talk?" she asked. I turned, already bracing myself. She didn't bother with small talk this time. "I've already promised my kids," she said, voice low, urgent. "They think we're going to Disney in June." That word "promised" hit like an accusation. I told her again that I was sorry she'd told them before securing time off, but that didn't make my vacation negotiable. Her expression changed. The softness drained from her face, replaced by something sharper, resentment edged with entitlement. "You can go to Costa Rica any time," she said. "You don't have kids. You don't have to worry about school calendars. This is my only chance." I felt heat creep up my neck. "That's not true," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This trip matters to my marriage. We planned it carefully. We saved for it. It's not disposable." She scoffed. "Come on, Alyssa, it's a luxury. This is about my children." I noticed how she framed it, how she elevated her needs by shrinking mine. I repeated, for the final time, that my answer was no. That's when her voice rose. "I can't believe how selfish you're being." The word landed hard, Selfish. For wanting to keep something I'd planned, paid for, and been approved for. For not sacrificing my happiness to fix her poor planning. She stared at me like she'd just uncovered something ugly about my character. Anyone with a heart would understand which vacation actually matters, she added. I didn't respond. I just walked out. By Monday, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Natasha no longer pretended to be subtle. She ignored me in meetings, gave one-word answers if I spoke to her at all, made a point of laughing loudly with others while excluding me from conversations. A few coworkers followed her lead, and then came the email. Subject line, vacation coverage request. It went out to the entire department, including management. Natasha wrote that she was dealing with a family emergency, that her elderly mother in Florida had fallen and broken her hip, that she needed to travel immediately to help with care and recovery, that she was desperately hoping someone might be willing to swap vacation dates. I stared at my screen, heart pounding. This was not the story she'd been telling. No Disney, no kids' dreams, no missed childhood memories. This was something else entirely. People responded quickly. Sympathy flooded the thread. Offers of support, comments about teamwork and compassion. Mark replied that anyone with June availability should seriously consider helping her. I felt sick. If she was telling the truth, I'd look heartless for refusing. If she was lying, she was manipulating the entire department. I didn't reply. Instead, I started thinking. Natasha had mentioned before that both her parents had passed away, more than once. Casually, in the way people do when explaining why holidays are hard. Her LinkedIn profile said she grew up in Ohio, not Florida. None of this was proof, just cracks. The pressure intensified. Coworkers stopped asking if I'd reconsider. They assumed I should. Even my manager pulled me aside, assured me my vacation was still approved, but gently suggested I think about whether there was any room for compromise. That word, compromise, felt heavy, because there wasn't one, and I was being asked to carry the emotional cost of saying no. I went home that night exhausted. Daniel listened quietly as I explained everything. His jaw tightened. "This isn't about vacation," he said. "This is about someone trying to bully you into fixing their life." I knew he was right. But the office had already decided who I was in their version of the story. And Natasha was about to push it even further. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed conversations in my head, Natasha's voice in the break room, the way my coworkers' expressions shifted after her email, the careful tone my manager used when he suggested compromise, as if it were a neutral word and not a quiet accusation. By Monday morning, my body felt heavier than usual. My shoulders ached. My jaw hurt from clenching. At work, I moved through the day like I was underwater. People were polite, too polite, the kind of politeness that means we're watching you. When I passed groups talking in low voices, conversations stopped. When I sat down in meetings, chairs seemed to space themselves farther away from mine. I kept asking myself the same question. Am I actually doing something wrong? That thought scared me more than Natasha ever had. Because if I let guilt rewrite reality, I'd start believing I owed people parts of my life I'd worked hard to protect. Daniel called me during lunch. "Did anything change?" he asked. "No," I said, "but it feels like I'm on trial." He paused. "You don't have to prove your innocence for protecting your marriage." That sentence stayed with me all afternoon. The following Wednesday, my manager scheduled a one-on-one. His office smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. He folded his hands on the desk and told me he wanted to make sure I was handling the situation well. He reiterated again that my vacation would not be revoked. But then he said, "This kind of thing affects team morale." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because pushing back felt dangerous. After work that day, Daniel suggested I talk to Natasha directly. One final conversation, a chance to clear the air. I was nervous, but I agreed. We met at a coffee shop near the office. Neutral territory. I told her I wanted to understand her situation better, that there were conflicting stories and I was under pressure at work. When I asked about her mother's injury, she faltered. Her explanation was vague, non-committal, details blurred. When I gently mentioned Disney, her demeanor changed instantly. She accused me of prying, of being suspicious, of questioning her integrity. "I don't owe you my personal life," she snapped. "I'm not asking for details," I said. "I'm asking for honesty." She leaned forward. "Even if it is about Disney, that doesn't make my need less real." That's when I realized something important. This wasn't about truth. It was about entitlement. She believed that wanting something badly enough justified any method of getting it. When I told her I felt manipulated, she stood up and walked out. At work, the coldness intensified. By the time my vacation arrived, I felt emotionally wrung out. And then, miraculously, Daniel and I were in Costa Rica. Warm air, green canopy, no emails, no whispers. For a week, we were just us again. But I knew something was waiting for me back home, and it was going to change everything. Coming back from Costa Rica felt like stepping from sunlight into a courtroom. The first morning back at work, I walked into the office still carrying traces of warmth in my skin, salt air, laughter, the quiet certainty that Daniel and I had chosen each other when it mattered. That certainty lasted until I reached my desk. Natasha didn't look at me. She didn't need to. During our first team meeting, she leaned back in her chair and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "It must be nice to disappear on an exotic vacation while other people are dealing with real emergencies." The room went silent. My manager cleared his throat and changed the subject, but the damage was done. I felt eyes flick toward me, then away, as if my presence itself made things awkward. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere became openly hostile. People stopped inviting me to lunch. Conversations went quiet when I approached. Feedback on my work became unusually nitpicky, as if I'd lost some invisible credibility. I started making mistakes, small ones, but enough to rattle me. I'd reread emails 3 times before sending them. I second-guessed decisions I used to make easily. Stress settled into my body like a low-grade illness. Then, one evening, I stayed late to finish a campaign report. The office was nearly empty, just the hum of computers and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. That's when I heard Natasha's voice. She was on the phone at her desk, speaking loudly, casually, unguarded. "I think Magic Kingdom first," she said. "The kids are most excited about that. Then Hollywood Studios the next day." My hands froze over the keyboard. She laughed. "Yeah, we leave next week. I've already started packing." Disney. Not a hospital, not a broken hip, not an emergency. The next morning, I checked the department vacation calendar. Natasha's name wasn't on it. No approved time off, no swaps, nothing. By Friday, she didn't show up for work. Then Monday, then Tuesday. By Wednesday, people were whispering again, this time confused. My manager called an emergency meeting. He looked tired, irritated. Natasha hadn't responded to calls, emails, messages, nothing. That afternoon, Mark approached my desk, face flushed. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. He showed me his phone. Photos. Natasha, her kids, Mickey Mouse, fireworks. Time stamped from the past few days. She wasn't caring for an injured mother. She was at Disney World. The truth spread fast. Apologies followed. Awkward ones. Sincere ones. Coworkers who wouldn't meet my eyes weeks earlier now hovered, embarrassed. When Natasha returned the following Monday, tan and relaxed, she was called into my manager's office immediately. The door stayed closed for over an hour. When she came out, her face was pale, her confidence gone. Later that day, an email went out. Unauthorized absence. Disciplinary action in progress. The office shifted. Suddenly, Natasha was the one eating alone, the one avoided, the one whispered about. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, because being right didn't erase what it had cost me, and the fallout was just beginning. I thought being proven right would feel like relief. It didn't. Instead, it felt like standing in the aftermath of a storm, everything exposed, quiet in a way that made the damage impossible to ignore. The office returned to something resembling normal, but I couldn't shake the sense that I'd been permanently altered by the experience. People apologized, yes. Some were sincere. Others were awkward, avoiding details, as if acknowledging what they'd done might make it real. But no one could give me back the weeks I spent questioning my own integrity. No one could undo the way I'd started shrinking inside myself just to survive the workday. Natasha became invisible. She showed up, did her work silently, ate lunch alone. No one laughed with her anymore. No one lingered at her desk. The same coworkers who once rallied around her now kept a careful distance. And that should have satisfied some instinct in me, but it didn't. Because every time I looked at her, I saw something else too. Desperation. Fear. A woman who had gambled everything and lost. And somehow that made me feel hollow. One evening, I sat on my couch, staring at nothing while Daniel cooked dinner. The smell of garlic and oil filled the apartment, but I barely noticed. "You okay?" he asked gently. I shook my head. I keep thinking, maybe I should have handled it differently. He turned off the stove and sat beside me. Different how? Maybe if I'd just given her what she wanted, none of this would have happened. No tension, no fallout, no one getting fired. He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "Alyssa, she didn't get fired because you went on vacation. She got fired because she lied, manipulated, and abandoned her job." I knew he was right. But knowing something logically doesn't stop emotional damage from bleeding. The lowest point came a week later, when my manager called me into his office again. This time his tone was different. careful, almost apologetic. He said HR had been reviewing Natasha's file, that her unauthorized absence wasn't an isolated issue, that complaints had been stacking up for months from other departments. She was already on thin ice, he admitted. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made me realize something darker. I hadn't just been targeted because of my vacation. I'd been targeted because I was safe, because I followed rules, because I didn't retaliate loudly, because I could be framed as the obstacle without fighting back publicly. That realization sat heavy in my chest. For days, I wondered who I'd become if the truth hadn't surfaced. Would I still be doubting myself? Would I have started apologizing for wanting my own life? That thought terrified me. One night, I stood in the shower, water pounding my shoulders, and felt something inside me finally crack. Not in anger, but in grief. Grief for the version of myself who almost learned the wrong lesson. The one who nearly believed that boundaries were selfish. That love, loyalty, and planning didn't matter as much as someone else's louder pain. I cried quietly, not because of Natasha, but because I'd come dangerously close to betraying myself. That was my breaking point, and it was also the beginning of something else. The shift didn't happen all at once. It happened in fragments. Small moments that slowly reassembled how I saw myself inside that office and beyond it. The first moment came when Natasha was officially terminated. There was no dramatic announcement, no gossip-filled meeting, just a short, carefully worded email from management stating that her employment had ended and that her responsibilities would be redistributed. That was it. No explanation, no justification. But the silence spoke volumes. In the days that followed, pieces of the truth surfaced quietly. A coworker from accounting mentioned that Natasha had pressured him to adjust expense reports months earlier. Someone from client services admitted she'd blamed others for mistakes that were hers. It wasn't satisfying to hear. It was clarifying. This wasn't a one-time lapse driven by desperation. It was a pattern. And I had just been the most convenient target. The second moment came from someone I didn't expect. My manager stopped by my desk late one afternoon. Not for a meeting, not for feedback. Just to talk. He admitted, carefully, that he hadn't handled the situation well, that he'd allowed emotion and group pressure to blur his judgment, that he should have shut down the gossip instead of encouraging compromise. I should have protected you from that, he said. It wasn't a full apology, but it was accountability. And something inside me loosened. The final moment came from myself. One evening, Daniel and I sat on the balcony, the city warm and quiet below us. He asked me a simple question. What did this whole thing teach you? I thought for a long time before answering. It taught me that boundaries aren't cruelty, I said slowly. They're clarity, and anyone who benefits from you having none will call you selfish when you draw one. Saying it out loud felt like reclaiming ground I hadn't realized I'd lost. I stopped shrinking at work after that. I spoke normally again in meetings. I stopped apologizing before expressing opinions. I didn't over-explain my decisions. And something surprising happened. People responded differently, with respect. Not because I'd been vindicated, but because I carried myself like someone who trusted her own judgment again. The story stopped following me. It lost power the moment I stopped carrying it. And in that quiet reclamation, I realized something important. I hadn't won. I'd grown. The aftermath didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded slowly, the way consequences usually do. Quiet, unglamorous, unavoidable. After Natasha was terminated, the office went through an adjustment period. Projects were redistributed, deadlines shifted, people recalibrated. On the surface, things returned to normal faster than I expected. But underneath, something fundamental had changed. Natasha's absence left behind more than an empty desk. It left behind discomfort. People started questioning stories they'd once accepted without thinking. Casual exaggerations now earned skeptical looks. Emotional appeals were met with pauses instead of instant agreement. Trust, once broken, didn't regenerate easily. I noticed it in small ways. Coworkers who used to overshare stopped doing so. Conversations became more measured. The office felt calmer, but also more honest. Several people approached me privately in the weeks that followed. Mark apologized again, this time without excuses. He admitted he'd projected his own guilt about not helping a struggling parent in his family onto me. Linda said she'd learned not to assume moral authority, just because someone sounded convincing. I accepted their apologies, not because they erased what happened, but because carrying resentment would only tether me to a story I was ready to leave behind. What struck me most was how quickly Natasha disappeared from the narrative. Within a month, new hires didn't know her name. Her desk was reassigned, her role absorbed. The office moved on. That, more than anything, revealed the truth she'd tried so hard to avoid. No one is indispensable when they burn bridges instead of building trust. A few weeks later, I ran into Natasha at a grocery store near my apartment. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner, tired. The confidence she once wielded like armor was gone. Her kids were with her, laughing, arguing over cereal. She hesitated when she saw me. Then she approached. She apologized. Not defensively, not conditionally. She admitted she'd lied, that she'd manipulated the team, that she'd convinced herself the ends justified the means because she was desperate and scared. She said losing her job forced her to confront patterns she'd been ignoring for years. I listened. I didn't absolve her. I didn't lecture her. I wished her well and meant it. Because accountability isn't about punishment. It's about recognition. Back at work, the atmosphere stabilized. Productivity improved. Tension dissolved. And slowly, subtly, my position strengthened. Not because I fought, but because I didn't fold. Daniel noticed the difference before I did. "You're lighter," he said one night. "Not because it's over, but because you didn't abandon yourself." He was right. The fallout hadn't destroyed me. It had clarified me. And that clarity carried into everything else. How I spoke, how I decided, how I protected what mattered. The story ended where it should have always been, with me standing exactly where I'd been all along. Grounded. There was no dramatic final scene. No victory speech. No moment where everyone suddenly understood everything all at once. Life simply steadied. Months later, Daniel and I sat at our kitchen table, planning our next trip. Nothing extravagant this time, just a long weekend somewhere quiet, but the difference was in how easily we planned it. No guilt, no hesitation, no instinct to minimize what we wanted. That was new. Work became just work again. I focused, I contributed, I trusted my instincts. The office felt healthier, not perfect, but honest enough to breathe in. Occasionally, someone would reference that situation in vague terms, always carefully, always with the unspoken agreement that we'd all learn something from it. I learned the most. I learned that boundaries don't require justification, that compassion doesn't mean compliance, that being kind does not mean being available for manipulation. I learned that people who frame your limits as cruelty are often upset because those limits work. Most importantly, I learned that protecting your marriage, your time, and your peace is not selfish, it's responsible. Daniel and I didn't just celebrate an anniversary that year. We rewrote how we showed up for each other. And as for Natasha, I don't hate her, I don't fear her, I don't carry her with me anymore. She was a chapter, not the lesson. The lesson was this: sometimes the hardest thing to do is stand still while others try to move you out of your own life. And sometimes standing still is the bravest choice you'll ever make.